Thanks so much, Tim. Really my pleasure to tell you a little bit more about genetic signatures. Excellent introduction. It made my job easier. We are a revenue stage healthcare company which is focused on the detection of infectious diseases. So infectious diseases are of interest to us because they're a leading cause of death, but they're potentially preventable with better diagnostic assays. So we have developed our own proprietary technology called 3Base. It is been developed over more than a decade. It is now a trusted and proven technology that is out in testing labs around the world with 100% customer retention since 2016. The core technology 3Base does give us some competitive advantages because of the way we've employed it into our testing protocols. We've designed this to be very high throughput, allowing labs to do thousands of samples a day, but also don't compromise on the number of targets that we pick up per sample, per clinical sample. You rightly said, being a manufacturer of infectious disease detection kits in a pandemic, is a busy time for us. We've certainly leveraged our capabilities to develop a test for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And we did that quite quickly and scaled up manufacturing quite quickly to meet the significant demand. And that has played well into our global expansion strategy, where we are taking our homegrown success into those much larger markets of Europe and the US. And certainly our COVID detection kit has resulted in increased recognition, creating new avenues for us to expand our customer base. It's a relatively simple business model. We design and develop and manufacture kits, in kitted form, which are sold to pathology laboratories who use our kits on patient clinical samples that come through to interrogate whether there's an infectious agent present, and then report back to the doctor to help them make a diagnosis. We do have multiple catalysts coming up in the coming year, which I'll take you through, each representing potential upside as we go through. So the next slide is really just to show the outstanding year that we have had. It is against the backdrop of the pandemic, but we have been rewarded with a positive share price performance, and you can see the 12-month performance there with the key milestones embedded over that graph. We are certainly more interested in what's to come. Our focus is on the current financial year and the coming 12 months, where we are on track to report sales growth in the current quarter of at least 25% above our previous quarter, which itself was a record quarter. We are focused on driving customer acquisitions throughout Europe and our market entry into the biggest market in the world, the North American market, and focused on launching new EasyScreen products that use our 3Base technology, expanding that product suite as we continue to scale manufacturing to meet the demand. So the next slide will take you through our revenue for the last 4 years, where you can see a 59% CAGR. That was the last quarter that I was referring to, of that $7 million, a record quarter for us. It's 351% up on the previous corresponding quarter, but annually as well, we had a record year of, we've just reported this morning, 11.3 million, which is 131% increase on the prior year. Certainly the rapid development of the COVID detection kit has driven that, but has opened up those offshore markets, or accelerated that interest that we're getting, with about 10% of our annual revenue coming from offshore customers. Certainly have increased our manufacturing capacity, which has resulted in that record quarter. We continue to raise our manufacturing capacity, which is why we're confident we'll have at least a 25% increase on the prior quarter. And we continue to ramp up as we go forward. So the next slide will just give you a little bit more detail on our financials. As I said, we have released that this morning. We've covered revenue. You can see on the expense line that we have certainly increased our investment into personnel, and this is across our teams in Europe and the US. And locally, across all of our functions, we've certainly invested in our development of a test for COVID-19. And we are also investing in the clinical trials that we are performing as part of an FDA clearance for our enteric protozoan kit. So the net loss was 2.1, which was an improvement over the last year. However, it's really, the impact of higher sales is evident in the second half, where we reported a maiden profit of 0.3 million, really reflecting the uptick in revenue. Cash balance is strong, 31 million, really allowing us to execute our expansion strategy with confidence. So the next slide will give you a little bit more information about the kits. They are in kitted form. As I said, the business model is relatively simple. We sell these kits to pathology labs who use them on clinical samples that come through the door every day, and these can run into the many thousands, especially during the pandemic. And these kits can detect whether viral infections, protozoan infections, bacterial infections. We do this on equipment that already exists in the laboratories, but we also develop our own equipment in collaboration with the leading robotic manufacturers around the world. And these give us a tremendous throughput where we can do approximately 200 patient samples in about 4 hours through to result, and can reload that machine every 2 hours. The next slide will show you the groups of kit that we manufacture and supply. We have an enteric kit which picks up over 20 causes of gastroenteritis, respiratory kits, which does include our test for COVID-19 and 15 other viruses. We have tests for the superbugs, which you would have heard about, antibiotic resistant bacteria, which are predicted to be a leading cause of death over the coming years. Kits for sexually transmitted infections and mosquito-borne infections. We have kits for meningitis and atypical respiratory in development. Taken together, a global market of approximately 10 billion per annum. Given the pandemic, I've created the next slide just to give you a snapshot or an insight into how we approach this. We designed the test to be used as a standalone test, which looks for the presence of the virus that causes COVID-19, but it can also be used as an add-on to existing customers who are already using our respiratory screen. Our Core 3-based technology, which I won't go into today, does give us an advantage over other tests because it gives us a resistance to the genetic drift or the mutation rates that occur in viruses, and certainly the COVID-19 virus has been reported to be mutating quite significantly. In terms of a summary, we have sought and received regulatory approvals in Europe and Australia, and those kits are currently being sold into those regions. We have prepared an EUA, emergency use authorization application with the US FDA, and we are waiting for clearance for that. However, we are now in a position where we can sell to select customers in the US under an exemption, a 4C exemption, which exists for those manufacturers who have put in an application and the FDA has deemed them to be of suitable quality, and we are intending on supplying under that exemption. I'm sure most have heard there are constraints in supply. We have been very focused on making sure none of our customers run out of product, and we can proudly claim that none of our customers have been without product to date, which is a fairly significant achievement given the logistic issues facing the world at the moment. So the next slide is really showing part of the reason we're getting such good traction, and it's really the competitive advantage that we have. So patients certainly benefit from our test. They are receiving a test that screens for multiple targets in about 4 hours. Laboratories are benefiting from our high throughput protocols and minimized hands-on time. And governments and payers are also benefiting from reduced hospital stays, reducing the spread of diseases. The next slide is really just highlighting that scalable nature of our product. we gain high throughput customers who generally, once they commit to you, will test every sample that comes through the door with your test. So very sticky revenue, similar to that printer and cartridge model, especially when we supply equipment. And you can see that as our revenue has tracked since listing quarter on quarter as we introduce new tests and introduce new customers. The next slide is really just a summary of our global expansion. North America, as I have said, we have submitted our EUA and now can supply under that 4C exemption. Europe and Australia, we have regulatory approvals for 4 of our kits, including the kit for COVID-19. And we do have additional products coming through the regulatory pipeline. So my final slide is just really summarising those milestones which could accelerate our revenue growth even further. Certainly for the COVID product, we are awaiting that final clearance with the US and targeting our first customer contracts. We are launching new kits and seeking regulatory approvals for the sexually transmitted kit, our mosquito-borne kit, and also our enteric protozoan trial in the US. But to summarise where I started, COVID-19 has certainly given us an opportunity to demonstrate our technology around the world. We've received that interest, and it's likely to broaden into the existing multiplex kits that we have, and we look forward to reporting those new contracts in those far bigger markets in the US and Europe. So I will pause there and happily take any questions.
Thanks, John. Just a couple of questions, common questions in regards to, like, how many kits are you actually selling at the moment, and where's the breakdown of those sales, and what's the margin on those kit sales?
So margin, I'll go backwards. Margin on diagnostic kits are quite high. We are a complete product supplier, so we supply consumables and plasticware as well as the high margin molecular diagnostic tests. So on balance, it's around 65%. We assume those will increase as we gain traction in the higher in those offshore markets, which have certainly a higher selling price in those offshore markets. We, as I said, have scaled up significantly, continue to scale, and anticipate being able to meet the additional demand as we go forward.
There's lots of questions here. So what is genetics signatures advantage compared to the antibody tests regarding, COVID-19 test?
Antibody tests are really designed to detect usually a response to the virus. So, and if a patient has antibodies to that virus, the best way to think of it is that window period that listeners might be familiar with, is certainly around HIV. It's a molecular test like ours is able to directly detect the genetic information of the virus. So a swab in your throat or nose contains that genetic information, which we detect directly. And so there have been plenty of studies that have shown that that is the frontline test to contain this virus, because the antibody tests take a number of days before they can detect active infections.
And with something like FDA approval, is there a time frame behind that, or are you just subject to the whims of the FDA? The FDA are inundated. They have said that then they are prioritizing different applications. Ours is a lab-based test. The application is in, but we do have now that 4C exemption, which allows us to supply to select customers in the US, and that is what we will be focused on in the coming weeks and months. And is that done through partnerships, or?
We have a direct sales force in the US.
Right.
Direct sales and support.
And just more broadly speaking, we've seen the virus kind of return and come back. And do you have a kind of long-term view of how you position yourself given what's going on currently, or is that kind of too difficult to ascertain? We can speculate, Tim. I don't see the virus going away anytime soon, and I don't think I'm in the minority there. Certainly, we've heard recently in the news of one patient who was reinfected, which says that our own immunity isn't long lasting. Coronavirus traditionally has been very difficult to design a vaccine for. I'm talking about the other strains of
of coronavirus, not the pandemic strain. I think what will happen is it will become just part of the routine testing. So we do sell a respiratory screening kit which detects 15 types of viruses, including the milder types of coronavirus. And I think this will be integrated into that sort of broad screen. Certainly customers that have been tested with our kits have benefited from, they have symptoms, they go to a COVID clinic, and if our lab tests for the complete multiplex, they are at least told you don't have COVID, but you have rhinovirus. And those levels are up to 60% of people coming through the clinic. So it gives the patient comfort that they've got the common cold as opposed to something like COVID-19.